I think if anybody who believes that, AI is going to ruin their business, they're delusional. Absolutely not. AI is not going to take your job, but people who use AI will. And that is really true for companies as well. AI alone, speaking for Living Plate RX, is not going to impact our business in terms of competition, because people who rely on AI, they're not our competition.
Welcome to the Startup Huddle. I'm your host, Jozef, and I'm excited to introduce you to the current and upcoming leaders of the startup tech world. We'll discuss digital products and key takeaways for life and professional growth. So grab a coffee and let's huddle up. Well, hello everyone again after a short summer break. Today we have here a very special guest, Jeanne Petrucci from Living Plate RX, our beloved client, and a very interesting person. Thank you very much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I don't know about very interesting person, but I'll take it.
I think definitely. So Today we are going to talk about quite a few things. You are running a company called Living Plate RX, and you can talk a little bit more about it in a few seconds.
Sure.
And I suspect from how I'm observing your progress, one of the main things and something that you're very good at is go-to-market, particularly community building. So I'll touch upon that topic as well. And if we have enough time, I would like to maybe talk a little bit about nutritionist market or the AI. We'll see where the discussion brings us.
Sounds great.
Okay, so to start, Jeanne, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you and see you again, Jozef. Love working with your team. So I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. I have a master's degree in nutrition education from Columbia University Teachers College, and I am a second career dietitian. So if it's okay with you, Jozef, I'll share a little bit of my origin story, because a lot of what I experienced as a practitioner informs what I do today. Is it okay if we start there?
Sure, that's a great idea.
Terrific. So I spent 30 years as a culinary instructor. So my first career, I am not a chef. I am a self-taught cook. And I spent 30 years in my community, my local community, teaching people how to eat healthy foods. I've always had an interest in food as it impacts health. And so I did that for 30 years. And I found myself naturally gravitating to the healthcare space. So I would conduct cooking demonstrations, like on site in hospitals, in doctors' offices, in nonprofits, really to support people who had been touched by chronic diseases, all different kinds of diseases, to support them with changing their nutrition habits or dietary habits. And in that 30-year span, it became very clear to me that if I wanted to help them on a deeper level, I would have to go back to school and become a registered dietitian, because registered dietitians are uniquely qualified to translate evidence-based research into actions that people can take to influence different health conditions. So things like cancer and heart disease and type 2 diabetes. And so I went back to school. It took a long time, took me about 7 to 8 years to complete all the kit and caboodle, all of the prerequisites. And then I earned my RD credential with the hopes of opening up a private practice, which I'm standing in now, actually, Jozef. My goal for my private practice was to incorporate culinary instruction into evidence-based nutrition care, because as a cooking instructor for 30 years, what I knew to be true was that people really struggled with changing their nutrition-related behaviors. And one of the primary reasons for that is that they didn't feel comfortable in the kitchen. We're on like our third generation, maybe even our fourth, of people who really lack culinary confidence, like confidence in the kitchen, and they lack confidence with selecting foods. And those are the things that you need to do in order to prepare food that drives better health outcomes. So my goal was really to incorporate culinary instruction into nutrition care. So I opened up a private practice, bricks and mortar. I can see Main Street from here. I have a great location. And I built a teaching kitchen. And part of my nutrition therapy for patients was to expose them to the foods, to host cooking classes, and to really get them in the kitchen so that they could operationalize all of the nutrition concepts that I was presenting to them. So, for example, if they were experiencing GI issues and they needed to increase their intake of fiber, we'd come into the kitchen and I'd show them, how to prepare oatmeal or chia pudding. And so that is how the practice ran. It became very clear to me very early on in my practice that there were a lack of tools available to dietitians like me, who were really focused on food as medicine principles in nutrition care. And so I started searching for help. I was desperate, and our practice grew very, very quickly. There were 3 dietitians here with me. I had a practice manager. And I started looking for tools to help me, things like meal planning software and evidence-based curricula, even things like handouts, something simple like that. And nothing existed that served my patients the way that I wanted to serve them. I really wanted to serve them with a really high level of integrity. And so I had made the decision to start creating these resources on my own. Now, with a master's degree in nutrition education, I was qualified to create materials. So things like handouts and ebooks and all the things that you see in the beautiful library that your team has built for me. So I was qualified to do that. On the meal planning side, I had thousands of recipes, but I didn't have the software to deliver it to my patients in a way that I wanted to deliver it. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between algorithm-driven meal plans and my meal plans, because they are different. And so I made the hard decision to stop practicing to solve this problem. Now, a lot of colleagues and a lot of people who listen to my story think, Jeanne built Living Plate RX out of her passion for food as medicine and nutrition. And I would say, Jozef, that while that's not entirely untrue, my business, Living Plate RX, was built out of pain. I couldn't practice. I had a pivotal moment in my professional career where I had a panic attack, my very first panic attack in my office between patients. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't write blogs. I can't create meal plans. I can't develop recipes and counsel my patients. And it occurred to me that there was probably a community of practitioners like myself who wanted to serve people with integrity and couldn't because they didn't have the resources. And so I took the chance. I'm like, I need to create these resources, not only for myself, but for my community. And really that's where it all began. And that was between 2017 and 2018 that I actually made that decision to solve the problem.
That's a great intro, and I definitely value the effort there. I myself, like as a typical consumer of a consumer of social media, but also a person who is interested in nutrition, can very well understand how difficult it is to navigate all the different options and all the different theories, right? Because it seems like, especially now with all the influencers on social media, there is always a new hype from paleo to carnivore. All of those theories claim to solve essentially most of your problems, and I don't think that people engaging with them actually see the benefits, and that's because it's not evidence based, right?
Correct.
So I really appreciate the let's call it the focus of your career as a dietitian. Now, to better understand, what were the key problems for yourself as a registered dietitian or other registered dietitian that led you to create the product? Because you mentioned that you didn't have the right resources to, for example, create the meal planning. What does it mean?
I think it would be really helpful at this point in our conversation to introduce your listeners to the evidence-based process of nutrition care. So the difference between influencers or wellness professionals who have certificates versus registered dietitians or other credentialed healthcare professionals is that we are bound by certain principles. And for dietitians, it is called the nutrition care process. And from the second that you interact with a potential patient to the time that they're in the chair with you, there is an evidence-based practice that we need to follow. So I can outline it for you pretty quickly here on a layman's level. The acronym is ADIME, ADIME. And so it begins with assessing the patient. Like, who are they? Where are they in their health journey? And it includes things like biometric screening. So blood work would be really important, but it also considers other mediators of health, things like social support, right? Do they have social support? Do they have access to healthy foods? Like exploring all of that in the assessment process. So it is a very comprehensive part of the nutrition care process to understand really this patient is coming to me in this state. And then you can decide what you're going to do moving forward. So really a comprehensive assessment, knowing what they're eating, what is their dietary pattern. And then it starts to become clear as the trained practitioner what the problem is. Now, most patients will come to a dietitian with a variety of problems. There's rarely just one thing going on, but our job is really to prioritize the one problem that we can impact the most with nutrition. And so we move on from assessment to diagnosis. You then have to diagnose the patient. Now, as a dietitian, I would never issue a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. That's for doctors. My job is to diagnose some intake related problems. So it could be something like excessive intake of carbohydrates, because that could influence type 2 diabetes. So if the patient was coming to me with elevated blood levels, it's excessive intakes of processed food, maybe excessive intake of high glycemic carbohydrates. So that, when I say diagnosis, that's what I'm talking about. And there are codes that we bill insurance for based on those diagnoses. So that is A and D. So we assess and then we diagnose. The intervention piece, that is where the problem existed, Jozef. That is where, we could assess our patients, we could diagnose them, and then, okay, how are we going to help these people get the outcome that they deserve and the outcome that they need? And in some cases, the outcome that's going to save their lives. That is what the intervention is all about. And the intervention includes all of those evidence-based activities, all of the education that you are going to be supporting this patient with to help them change their behavior. Because at the end of the day, eating is a behavior, right? And you need to solve the problem by changing the behavior, by changing the dietary pattern. And so this intervention, Jozef, to now answer your question, that is where the biggest problem existed, was that I didn't have the resources. I didn't have a handout on type 2 diabetes that I could give to the patient. I had to create it. I didn't have a meal plan that contained low glycemic index recipes for my patient. And so I was caught in the intervention piece. And I really wanted to provide the highest level of care that these patients deserved. And the only way to do that was to create content the way that I knew how, from an evidence-based perspective. Yeah. And then just to move on, we don't have to talk about it, but I just wanted to finish ADIME because it is important in software development, right? Because you're tracking metrics as well. After the intervention, like once you put together this robust evidence-based and dynamic intervention that excites the patient, right? So you want them to be like, motivation is a huge part of nutrition related behavior change. So you want them to get excited about the intervention. Handing somebody an AI generated meal plan along with a handout is not going to change their behavior. It's not going to get them excited, right? So we need to get them excited. And then we kind of moderate how they're doing. We keep track of them and then we evaluate. We actually say, okay, this is where the person started in the assessment process and this is where they are now. Do we need to revisit the intervention and change something and kind of go through the process again? So that is, it's very dynamic. It is very consistent with health behavior change theory. People rarely just change their behavior and stay there, right? It's always like this dynamic process, but having an intervention that has really high quality tools that are dynamic and again, tools built with integrity. I do want to talk about that a little bit today. That's the difference. That makes the difference for the patients, right, in getting the health outcomes.
And just to summarize the main problem there. So for most of the registered dietitians before leaving Plate RX, the problem was that they had to spend a lot of time like creating those specific interventions, but also in a way which will excite, of course, the patient without like anything. So they essentially had to prepare everything by themselves. And the second problem was that, and I suspect that, right, it also, most of the registered dietitians, they are not graphic designers, nor they are very techy. So it's also very hard, I think, for them to do this if they can do it at all in like a scalable way, right?
You can't. I'll tell you right now, you can't do it all. So, right. I mean, but what I was seeing in the Facebook groups, like dietitians are very communicative. We're very community oriented. So I could see in private Facebook groups, people were really struggling with creating this content. And, one of the things too that we haven't talked about yet is being competitive in the market. If I have a private practice, I need to earn money to sustain that private practice. So in addition to serving my patients, I need to provide content that is so dynamic and so different that it's going to attract more patients, right? So we also need to keep that in mind. Dietitians had no time to write blogs and maintain their website and be on social media because they really just needed to focus on the patients.
That makes a ton of sense. And so this leads to the creation of Living Plate RX. So can you tell us a little bit more about the product?
Yeah. So, well, it started in one place and it ended up in another, as most software development journeys happen. The main problem was meal planning. And it's so interesting, Jozef, because now that we've been in the market now for 4 full years, as a profitable service for registered dietitians. And we can talk a little bit about what the trigger was, because it was COVID that was kind of pivotal for us. But the meal planning is a huge pain point for registered dietitians and nutrition professionals, healthcare professionals in general, because every consumer, every patient comes to the counseling room wanting a meal plan, because people think that meal plans will solve their problem. People think that meal plans will help them get a better health outcome, because that's what we're sold. That's what we're told. Well, they don't solve the problem, number one. And number two, nobody follows a meal plan. I don't know, Jozef, if you've ever tried to follow a meal plan, but, it's interesting for a lot of people to hear me, a meal planning software developer say, nobody follows a meal plan. But when it comes to behavior change, nobody follows a meal plan. And really what the meal plan is intended to be is a space for the practitioner and the consumer to have a conversation around food and to set goals around culinary behaviors and kitchen behaviors and food. It is not meant to be a mandate. So that's really important to note. But most of the practitioners, when we first started offering this, they were coming to us for the meal plans. And I think that if you asked my community now, their experience with Living Plate, they will say they came for the meal plans, but they stayed for the content, because the content is that super valuable piece that builds out the intervention. So, in the meal planning space, Jozef, we do have some competition, but they run on very different principles. And the principles for my meal planner is that it is food driven and human enabled, right? So food driven, human enabled versus algorithm driven. So on our meal planners, you don't go in and plug in carb, protein, fat and say, okay, computer algorithm, or okay, AI, generate a meal plan for me. Because I guarantee you that is going to be a lousy meal plan. I have yet to see a computer algorithm generate a suitable meal plan for a patient. And that's because it's lacking that human intervention. It's lacking the knowledge of who is this patient? What are their preferences? What do they like? What is their culture? What is their food access? Where are they on their health journey, right? That's all practitioner driven information. And so in order to provide a better meal planning solution, I built software from scratch with a team. I'm not a software engineer, but I hired a team here in New Jersey to support me. I'm in New Jersey in the United States, to support me with building the meal planner. And we are now undergoing a complete overhaul of the meal planner with pseudo support in your team, which is really exciting. And so our in-house tech team and your team are working really nicely together to further improve that experience. But initially that's where I started, Jozef, was really just focusing on building this meal planning software. And it was really scrappy. We built it with limited resources. We probably didn't go through the same process that, we would do, that we're doing today with you, certainly. But it got us a minimal viable product, that we knew our community needed, because our dietitians flooded to this meal planner because I was a practitioner. So I knew what was working in the counseling room and what wasn't. And they were finding the same thing, these algorithm-driven meal plans, or these meal plans that weren't dynamic. The meal plans where the patient couldn't change, the patient couldn't scale a recipe, the patient couldn't swap out chicken for salmon. You need all of that in order for people to get excited about changing their behaviors. So that is the story of the meal planner, and that is where Living Plate RX started. But then we naturally started building our really library of content. So things like handouts, things like ebooks, cooking videos, digital courses. These were all things that our community who had opted into the meal planning system, that's what they wanted. They needed more support, more resources with building these dynamic interventions. Meal plans are great, but it's only one small piece of an overall dietary intervention. So that's when we expanded just before COVID. So in 2019, we started offering a library of products on, a third-party LMS. And it worked for a while, but then we decided, of course, we needed to build our own. And that's when we came to you.
Amazing. And so essentially your main user is a registered dietitian, right? And they can, on your platform, create a particular dynamic meal plan for their customer, for the consumer. But they can also access a library of other materials, such as you said, handouts for the customer, or like an educational video for the customer. And I assume that these all can be white labeled, right, for the particular practice of the.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So really important. Remember, I said just a few minutes ago how, the scaling of a practice and business growth is really, really important. And it's important for me to support my community with, if it's a private practice dietitian, with growing their practice, and if it's a corporation, with representing their philosophy. And so we need to have white labeling. So because you can't grow and scale on somebody else's content, right? But here's what an interesting thing to note, Jozef. As an evidence-based practitioner, as a community, we all work off the same body of evidence. So if a dietitian across the country wrote a blog post on type 2 diabetes and I wrote a blog post on type 2 diabetes, we both more or less would be saying exactly the same thing in a different way. So this idea of having a library of evidence-based content is super appealing to practitioners and corporations and startups, because they know it's grounded in evidence-based practice, and they can come in and they can edit it and they can brand it according to their philosophy. They never have to create content from scratch again. And that's really the benefit of opting into Living Plate RX. And on the meal planner side, same thing. We provide meal plans by nutrition prescription. So if somebody needs to follow an anti-inflammatory diet or a low FODMAP diet or a plant-based diet, we have those meal plans already pre-built out. They don't have to create anything from scratch. So huge time savings for startups and institutions, like at our enterprise level. They're not having to build their own software solution because we already have it. Mm-hmm. And it's been fleshed out in practice, and we have thousands of practitioners using it all the time. And the one thing about dietitians especially is they're very, very communicative. So they tell us what they want. They tell us what they like, what they don't like. And so what you've seen over the period of the past 4 years, where we started with one product and we've evolved to where we are today, that is not due to me and my team. That is due to our community and listening to them and responding to them to get them what they need.
Yeah, I think that for sure the best growth strategy is to listen to the users and adapt the product to the needs of the users. It's great that your community is so communicative and that you understand it.
Yeah.
You mentioned your users, and I don't have all the information. Although we work together, I wanted to come to this podcast very open-minded and ask you the right question. So, what about the number of users and the revenue? Where are you at right now, if you want to share?
Yeah. So we have thousands of practitioners. We have different levels of of offers, right? So we have membership offers, we have content bundles. So I really never wanted to box anybody out with pricing. I want to make it affordable. So our membership is $99 per month or $999 per year right now as we're speaking, but it goes up by $100 every year because we continue to add content. So that's where we are right now on September 4th, 2024. But we also have other ways that people can opt into content if they're just starting and potentially they're not ready for the membership. So we have served well over 4,000. So we have 4,000 users of Living Plate RX, the meal planner, the library, the content. And our revenue at this point is multi-seven figures, which I'm really excited to say that growth has come from institutional buy-in to what we do. So startups, hospital systems, enterprise level users of Living Plate RX. So we're really excited about that.
And how do you go about user acquisition? So you mentioned that you have certain partners or institutions, right, that support you and embrace the product and the mission. But then also I've seen quite a few webinars that you've organized, or at least you're organizing, even if I'm not mistaken, even a conference or events. So I guess that a lot of the user growth can be attributed to working with your community and community building. So can you tell us all the different ways how you went about user acquisition?
Yeah, for sure. Let's just be clear that almost always, even if it is a well commercialized software company, almost always it's the registered dietitian who reaches out to us. So the leadership of these software companies, these institutions, they're asking the registered dietitians to make certain things happen, right? To essentially build interventions. And so, what we're seeing in the industry right now is taking what I've shared with you that happens in the counseling room, right? The process of ADIME of building interventions and just scaling it. So the biggest change that I've seen in the industry really since COVID has been scalability, scaling. So now these institutions and these corporate partners are now scaling, but it's almost always, I can only think of one exception. Almost always it is a registered dietitian who reaches out to us, say, hey, would you be willing to do a demo for our leadership? I think that your service is something that we can use. The way that I reach these dietitians is by being where they are. And that can be anything from the Food and Nutrition Conference and Expo, which is the biggest nutrition conference for registered dietitians every year, happens in October. So we're gearing up for that now. We're, 8,000 plus dietitians. 8 to 10,000 really show up there. So we're there. We have a booth. We're visible, letting people know who we are. We also go to another key conference, Today's Dietitian, which is in May. That conference is a little bit smaller, but super targeted. Many entrepreneurial RDs attend there. So really my target market. Those two conferences. And then most recently, we are attending two digital healthcare conferences, such as Health and Vive. We're going to be attending those this year because, again, what we're seeing, the scaling in the market is demanding that these companies know who we are because we can significantly help them with their nutrition related content. So, we pick about 4 key conferences, and those are the ones that we decide to go to every year. And then also showing up as a speaker. One thing that you and I had talked about at one point was, this idea of thought leadership and how that can help fuel the business. I think that played a huge role in my business. I like to talk about what I do. I'm very passionate about incorporating culinary instruction into nutrition care. When everybody globally experienced COVID and we were all forced as practitioners to run our practices virtually, it was really hard for a lot of registered dietitians because we're so used to counseling people in person. And now all of a sudden we're having to, use digital products, digital tools, and virtual ways of communicating. And so really establishing myself as a thought leader in that space of, okay, we're in shutdown, but here is how you can reach your community. Here's how you can reach your patients. Here is how you can run your practice. So really took me getting out on social media twice a week, every week for a year and a half. twice a week, every week for a year and a half. I did cooking demos, and it was mostly to reach out to my community, but we had a lot of consumers joining me too. I ran 2 programs. One was called Test Kitchen Tuesday, and the other was a digital dinner party. And, look, I was looking for a way to get out of the house just like everybody else. So I would come to my office, my teaching kitchen. I was by myself. I was like running the video equipment and conducting a cooking demo. At the same time, it was a lot, but in doing that and practicing that and really getting comfortable with offering evidence-based nutrition education in a virtual space, I was able to elevate myself as a thought leader in that space. So that was really important, right? So I could create the materials to support my community there. And that carried with it, I think, a certain level of respect because I'd actually done the work, right? I walked the walk. I've done the work. I had a practice. I write my own content, and I think that people were looking for that at that time in 2020. So social media is a place where a lot of registered dietitians are. I wouldn't say social media plays a huge part in the growth of my business, but it's a place where I do communicate with my community. I'd say on the private social media side, so like private Facebook groups, that has an impact on my business because whenever there's a question in a private Facebook group that I can answer thoughtfully, I will go in and answer that. And again, that really kind of fuels the thought leadership idea, right? So I think I'm a personal brand, so it's easier for me, Jozef, to do that than a brand that doesn't have a face associated with it, right? So it's a little bit easier for me to just kind of get out there and say, hey, I'm here to help you. Here's some real value. I mean, throughout COVID and even now, I deliver huge value. I give so much away for free on social media and through my free webinars. And I think people just really appreciate that. And I'm also very, transparent as well about what we do.
So the key aspect, just to summarize, you are having certain like go-to-market activities on the conferences. We again do the same thing. We go to a lot of startup and enterprise conferences, like buy a booth and be there on the site, establish those conversations. But again, like with the value of your the value of your customer, the actual lifetime value revenue wise of the customer, I think the most important go-to-market I would expect is to actually using those social media platforms, right? Or running ads. So would you attribute most of the growth to your which of those activities?
Great question, Jozef. So initially I started running Facebook ads in 2019. And I initially ran the Facebook ads to try and understand if I had something, right? Do I have a membership living here somewhere? Because at that point in 2018, 2019, I was really just selling to anybody who asked me to buy my content and use my meal planner. But it wasn't until 2019 that I started running Facebook ads. And they were always profitable, like always. And so I knew, and I was running them myself. Like at that time, you actually could run them yourself. So I took a course and I created an offer and I started running my own Facebook ads, and we were at 2.0 ROAS and above for years. Right. And I think that Jozef spoke to, really the need in the market because it was during COVID. People needed digital content. And that's what I was providing. So I kind of got lucky that way. Our business exploded like 400% for many, many, many months. It was very hard for me to kind of keep up because I was operating myself. And we ran Facebook ads. So our cost to acquire a customer was nothing. I was actually making money on that. And then we took on a partner. Today's Dietitian is actually minority owner of my company of Living Plate RX, and they are always participate in our meetings. So it's a really great team. And that acquisition really permitted me to not have to focus so much on Facebook ads because that partner brought to me all the eyeballs that I was trying to reach on Facebook ads. So I would say, I ran those Facebook ads initially for about 2.5 years. And then once Today's Dietitian came on board, we turned them off. But I think we're going to explore putting them on again. I do miss them. I do miss the whole process. So we might be refocusing on that. But that was initially how we grew our base of members. And then one other thing that we didn't talk about, Joseph, in terms of, going to market strategies, partnerships are huge for us. And because we are the content providers, we are the culinary nutrition content providers, but we're not necessarily the vehicle. So if a dietitian, wanted to manage their practice, they need an EHR, they need an electronic health record system, a practice management system. So we partner with EHRs, primarily Healthy is our closest partner, and we integrate our meal planner and our content into their EHR, thereby improving the process, the workflow of dietitians even more. And so we're able to leverage these partnerships to get in front of different audiences. And we have other strategic partnerships that we engage in, and they're typically services that dietitians need to run their practices that are not either meal planning or content creation. And so partnerships are huge as well. And we do a lot of education, like dietitians love professional development. We're required to do professional development. And so that's where kind of webinars come in and speaking engagements.
And so again, to summarize, you started by the Facebook ads, and then you were able to, which you had a great return. You had a great return on that, just confirming the product market fit. And then you could see you were able to establish more serious, like let's call B2B partnerships, right? Which are now driving the growth. And how important do you think is all your social media presence in all of this? Like you talk a lot about thought leadership. I think it's kind of difficult for many founders to even think about what it is. Everyone is trying to cut the, as quickly as possible to actual revenue and converting users. So can you talk to us a little bit more about how you approach thought leadership, why you think it's important, and what role it plays in your business?
Registered dietitians are a skeptical bunch, and we, generally speaking, trust each other, right? Versus kind of an outside organization, coming in. I think for, it's really trust. I mean, talking about the know, like, and trust factor, right? Like every organization has to have like kind of baseline. If people don't know, like, and trust you, they're not going to give you their money, no matter what you're promising, right? And so I think the thought leadership really accelerates that know, like, and trust, right? So I'm an RD. I have a master's degree from a really fine institution, right? So it establishes a lot of trust, but maybe they don't know or like me yet, right? The only way that they get to know and like me is if they can see me and hear me and know that I'm here to give them value and support them, and really need to communicate your values in a really authentic way. And I think it's where a lot of people get tripped up, right? Like everybody knows the know, like, and trust kind of formula, right? For acquiring customers. But I think few are successful at really just being so transparent, like really just being themselves and being accepted that way. I think that is, and you're not everybody's going to like you, and that's okay. Right. But you're trying to find those people. You can't please everybody all the time. So just showing up, being yourself, your authentic self. Authenticity is huge. And being able to, communicate that you are here to help. Like, yes, I'm here to sell a service, but I'm not salesy. Like, I know that my service can help institutions, organizations, dietitians. I know it can help a lot of people. And so that's what kind of fuels my activity on the social media. So it's very much not canned. It's, again, it's just me showing up saying, I can help you. This is how I can help you. Here's some free content. If it resonates with you, get on a call with me. And, that's kind of how the conversation starts. So, you're with Facebook ads. I was walking into a room and I was having Facebook find the people that kind of aligned with me so that I could talk to them. But it wasn't until people got to know me either through a video or a webinar that they would convert people. It's not a click and buy situation, right? It was always, you have to nurture people. So I would say really just reflect on the know, like, and trust. And that's where the thought leadership comes.
So you would even, so am I right to say that most of the activities that you do on social media allow you then later? So it's not like you're converting directly or driving too much traffic directly to the website, but then by the amount of content and the reach, you are able to, your customer already knows you from somewhere. right?
Yeah,
They already
exactly.
saw some of the piece of your content, they trust you, and therefore they buy. But it's not like they're buying directly by consuming your content.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, for certainly not for our corporate or enterprise partners. Like they're not just going to buy based on a social media post, but they can get to know, like, and trust me. And it's very social media for me and for most people actually is very top of the funnel activity. And you and can engage in it as much or as little as you want. I don't convert clients or registered dietitians like on social media, but it is a way for them to get to know, like, and trust me, a way for them to get into my funnel so that I can nurture them to a paying client eventually, and then retaining them. You didn't ask me about retention, but I think that speaks volumes about the health of a business. Our retention is, I think it's like 3.2% right now. When practitioners and companies come to us, we deliver, like we over deliver on value. And so they stay. And I think that paying attention to your attrition rates is really important too. So that's kind of the bottom of the funnel, but top of the funnel, social media, it's also my business card, right? It's where people go to find out, well, who's Jeannie, who's Living Plate, RX, what do they offer? Again, just getting to know, like, and trust me so that we can have a conversation, like get to the second date, right?
Yes, but that's a very, very interesting point I think that you are making, and what most of the founders that I see undervalue. And that's, people, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to establish that strength, right? And the presence, and you don't see the results directly. And
No.
the views are very low in the beginning, etc. So it takes a lot of time and effort, but it has a lot more other benefits and impacts on the business that are not maybe direct, but let's call them like secondary or side effects.
It does take time. It definitely takes time, but it's, that's kind of the time money thing that doesn't translate real well. A lot of things you can exchange money for time. Thought leadership is not one of them. Know, like, and trust factor is not one of them. You can't buy know, like, and trust, and you can't buy thought leadership. The way that you get that is by showing up and, showing up where people are. My community tends to be on social media, so I need to show up a little bit. I'm not terribly active, but active enough. And that, I found a nice balance there. So I think like that's the biggest distinction, Jozef, is, you can't buy that. So no amount of VC money is going to get you that.
And you also have an amazing user retention, as you just said.
Yeah.
How do you work with your current members of the community? What are all the activities that you do to keep them engaged, to have you on top of your mind, trust you, like you?
Well, your software is really helping us with that right now. I will say that, like, communicating and reaching our community is a lot easier now because we can do that within the platform. But just continuing to, I think number one, Jozef, would say listening and responding. You need to create a process through which your members can give you feedback, or your community can give you feedback to say, this is working, this isn't working, can you fix this? And how you respond to that speaks volumes about how you serve your clients. And we're very responsive. I tend to be more reactive than my director of operations wants me to be. Like, I'm always like, oh, there's a problem. Somebody said something on the Facebook group. We need to fix that now, when in fact it probably could be fixed next week. But just being responsive and listening, and again, just being authentic and saying, I make mistakes too. Like, I'm not perfect. Our team is not perfect, but we're here to deliver the best experience possible for you. But you need to have the technology in place in order to deliver that. And in working with your team, that's where we have been able to really elevate our responsiveness and our customer service, because when they log into Living Plate RX, there are a lot of different ways that I can communicate with them through different posts. And there's a lot of ways that they can communicate with us as well, so that we can be responsive. But that's the key, is really listening and responding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's definitely a lot of useful advice for most of the products out there on the market. We ourselves are trying to build a community around us, and it's a hard thing to do, I would say. And it really, as you said, it takes a lot of time. Also, takes a lot of time to learn in the sense of what works, what doesn't work, and how to, as you said, be responsive, be there for the people. And in order to do that, you normally need to use technology, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, social proof, I think, is really important too. when somebody calls me for a testimonial about pseudo labs, like I'll take that call immediately. Like I'm a super fan of your team, and that means a lot. And the same happens with our community as well, especially on the corporate and enterprise side, because they all talk to each other. They're all in the same circles where I might not be in the room, but somebody who has worked with me is in the room, and they can say, you need to speak to Living Plate RX. And, I think that's really helpful for establishing social proof and going back to know, like, and trust, gaining people's trust and just letting them know that you're there to support them and that you can be helpful.
Perfect. Thanks very much. That's definitely useful even for me. What about maybe the last topic that we could quickly touch upon? What do you think about the AI, all the tools that can, one, like help you create content, which is one feature of your platform, and two, probably help with the meal plan as well? How do you look at this? Is it going to maybe endanger the product, or you see it as maybe a useful next optimization of the process or future added value for your product?
Yeah, definitely the latter. I think if anybody who believes that, AI is going to ruin their business, they're delusional. Absolutely not. I think people, and we've heard this quote many times, right, on many podcasts and in many articles, that AI is not going to take your job, but people who use AI will. And that is really true for companies as well. I think, when AI became a little bit more accessible, it was very interesting because there were several companies who were then claiming to be in the digital meal planning space. And I wasn't even following it. My community is amazing. And they were sending me emails and DMs saying, oh my goodness, did you see so-and-so? They're now offering meal plans. I'm like, let me take a look at that. Had to be responsible and take a look at it. I'm like, oh, well, it's AI generated and you can tell, right? This was not a human enabled meal plan. So AI alone, speaking for Living Plate RX, is not going to impact our business in terms of competition, because people who rely on AI, they're not our competition. We are a human-enabled platform, practitioner-driven, food-driven. But AI within Living Plate RX as a tool, it serves so many purposes. And I think one of several ways that it really helps us save time is by summarizing content, repurposing content. So for example, I'll give you an example, always a great way to illustrate. I just wrote a 1,200 word blog post on nutrition during cancer treatment. Now, this was a blog that I actually had written 5 years ago, and I needed to revisit and I needed to find some more research. So using AI to help me find the updated research to support me with reimagining this blog and recrafting it. So taking my original content and putting it into AI to not only elevate the blog itself, but then to generate social media posts from it or create I've actually created 4 handouts from this one blog post. And I could have gotten that work done by myself, but it would have taken me at least 4 times as long. So I think that, from speaking personally and for the Living Plate RX team, it helps us accelerate our content creation process. It also helps us to repurpose and to organize our content in a way that, again, we could do it, but it would just take so much longer. So time savings is really where it's at. Just this idea that you can use AI to create content and copy and paste it, like that doesn't exist in my world. We're evidence-based practitioners. Everything, including our meal plans and our recipes, they need a human eye. They need a human touch. We do not generate AI images for our meal planner. Like, it's going to be a picture of my lunch plate or not, or I'm not publishing it. Like, it needs to be realistic. So I think, the downside to AI is that, we have opened up ourselves, to more perfectionism, especially in the nutrition space. It's not appropriate, like the perfect picture of a recipe or, and it just, it's just not appropriate, or like a meal plan that exactly matches every single preference and thing that you want. Because when you do that, you eliminate teaching moments and you really box people out. And it's just, that's not what we're all about, I think. But AI can definitely serve a purpose in terms of helping us generate grocery lists. And so there's a lot of ways that we're using it right now to support us. But it's mostly to repurpose, to reimagine, to get the creative juices flowing, not to create original content or meal plans.
Yes. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of your distinction and your niche compared to like what AI can generate these days. And it's also nice that it's actually helping your business rather than impacting it negatively. So maybe, I think, I think that we discussed everything I wanted to. Maybe, is there anything, the last thought that you wanted to, something you wanted to share with the early stage founders that are, right now thinking about setting up their business? You went through that. So something that comes to your mind.
I read a book that brought me to tears early on. It's not an emotional book. It's a business book, right? And I'll share with you what it is. But, as I was reading this book, I was in the middle of building my digital meal planning platform. And in reading this book, I realized I was doing it all wrong. My purpose was wrong. And that book was Blue Ocean Strategy. What I was doing in 2017, 2018 was building a better mousetrap. And I'm reading this book and I know this is not going to be successful, right? And this is after pouring, 6 figures initially into starting the development of this software. That was the wrong approach. So building a better mousetrap that is just literally like a race to the bottom. It's just not, in my mind, it's not a way to approach software development or even, a new company. Really creating something totally unique was the way to go. And so as I'm sitting there reading this book, sobbing, because I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I done? I needed to figure out, how could I create a blue ocean? How could I make my competition irrelevant? And the only way to do that is to create something totally unique and to build a community around it that supports it. And I think that's what we've done with Living Plate RX, because we created a solution that doesn't exist, right? There's no all-inclusive nutrition resource solution that operates the way that we do. So that book saved me. That book saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars, because otherwise I would have continued to build a digital meal planner that I thought was a better mousetrap, when in fact that was not what I should have been doing, right? So if you have this idea that you think you can do something better than somebody else in the market, do that, but then also think, how can you differentiate what you're doing? Don't just make it better, make it so different and so unique that you make your competition irrelevant. And if you haven't read that book, definitely read that book. So that would be my parting advice.
Perfect. Thanks very much for the last note, Jeanne. It was very pleasant talking to you. And hopefully see you soon. Hopefully some of your potential clients will listen to the podcast. And have a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And that's it for today's episode of the Startup Huddle. Thank you very much for listening, and make sure to catch all episodes on the startuphuddle.com and follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter for more insights and updates on the world of startups. Thanks again for tuning in.